They call it jihad. We can see clearly the confusion in their minds, but we cannot see clearly what it is that we do. We call it crusade. When we turn right around and say that our God condones the killing of innocent civilians as a necessary means to an end. We say that God understands collateral damage. We say that God knows how to forgive friendly fire. We say that God will bless the shock and awe as we take over unilaterally another country, calling it a coalition because we got 3 guys from Australia going against the United Nations, going against the majority of Christians, Muslims, and Jews throughout the world, making a preemptive strike in the name of God. We cannot see how what we are doing is the same thing Al-Qaeda is doing under a different color flag, calling on the name of a different God to sanction and approve our murder and our mayhem. And let me tell you something. Jesus said something about that too. Oh yes, he did. Jesus said, how can you see the speck in your brother's eye and can't see the log in your own eye? Well, I submit to you that we can't see it, first of all, because we don't see nobody who don't look like us, dress like us, talk like us, worship like us as brother. And Jesus calls them brother. We demonize them, and that makes it all right to kill them because our God is against demons. Then we can't see the speck, most of all, because we equate our government with our God. We confuse government and God. Let me tell you something. We believe in this country, and we teach our children that God sent us to this promised land. He sent us to take this country from the Arawak, the Susquehanna, the Apache, the Comanche, the Cherokee, the Seminole, the Choctaw, the Hopi, and the Arapaho. We confuse government and God. We believe God sanctioned the rape and robbery of an entire continent. We believe God ordained African slavery. We believe God makes Europeans superior to Africans and superior to everybody else too. We confuse God and government. We said in our founding documents, as a government, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Created, that means God, and endowed with a certain inalienable right. That means given by God. And then we define Africans in those same documents as 3/5 of a person. We believe God approved of African slavery. We believe God approved segregation. We believe God approved apartheid, and a doctrine which says that all men are created more equal than other men, and we're talking about white men. We confuse God and government. We believe God approves of 6% of the people on the face of this earth, controlling all of the resources on the face of this earth, while the other 94% live in poverty and squalor, while we give trillions of dollars of tax breaks to the white rich. We believe God was a founding member of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Look at the lily whiteness of the G7 nation the next time you see a picture, and then tell me if you see anything wrong with that picture when you hold it up against the picture of the color of the world's population. We confuse God and government. We believe God is on the side of the wealthy. We believe it's all right to send our military to fight, and if necessary to die in Iraq and anywhere else we decide is a part of the axis of evil, while George W. cuts the military benefits so that when those boys and girls come back home, they can be as bad off as some of the Iraqis that we just liberated. We confuse God and government. We do. We believe we have a right to Iraqi oil. We believe we have a right to Venezuelan oil. We believe we got a right to all the oil on the face of the earth, and we got the military to take it if necessary. Or as George W. piously says, as God so leads him. We confusing God and government. We believe it is all right to decimate the Afro-Colombian community by arming the paramilitary with United States tax dollars, our dollars, a hired military whose real job is to protect the oil line was stolen by the oil interest. We're confusing God and government. And it gets worse. It gets worse. We've got a paranoid group of patriots in power that now, in the interests of homeland stupidity, homeland security, they are taking away the constitutional right of free speech because it's harmful to the interests of national security. And those interests equate God with government. Our money says in God we trust, and our military says we will kill you under the orders of our commander-in-chief. If you dare to believe otherwise, we are still confusing God and government in the year 2003, just like they confuse it in Luke 19. Well, in case you are in that great number, and I understand from the polls that the number has gone up. Still confused. If you're in that number of confused folks 2,000 years after Christ, let me share 3 quick things with you just to help clear up your confusion. Turn to your neighbor and say, now listen, you got to say it right. Say it with attitude and with ebonics. Say he. Fitting to help somebody tonight. Turn on the other side and say fitting up. Government is number 1. Governments lie. This government lied about their belief that all men were created equal. The truth is they believed all white men were created equal. The truth is they did not believe that even white women were created equal in creation nor in civilization. The government had to pass an amendment to the Constitution to get white women to vote. Then the government had to pass an equal rights amendment to get equal protection under the law for women. The government still thinks a woman has no rights over her own body, and between Uncle Clarence, who sexually harassed Anita Hill, and a closeted Klan court that is a throwback to the 19th century, handpicked by Daddy Bush, Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, found between Clarence and that stacked court, they're about to undo Roe versus Wade, just like they're about to undo affirmative action. The government lied in its founding documents, and the government is still lying today. Governments lie. Turn to your neighbor and say, governments lie. The government lied about Pearl Harbor. They knew the Japanese were going to attack. Governments lied. The government lied about the Gulf of Tonkin. They wanted that resolution to get us in the Vietnam War. Governments lied. The government lied about Nelson Mandela, and our CIA helped put him in prison and keep him there for 27 years. The South African government lied on Nelson Mandela. Governments lied. Turn back to your neighbor and say it again. Governments lied. The government lied about the Tuskegee experiment. They purposely infected African American men with syphilis. Governments lied. The government lied about bombing Cambodia. And Richard Nixon stood in front of the camera. Let me make myself perfectly clear. We are not. The government's lied. The government lied about the drugs for arms Contra scheme orchestrated by Oliver North. And then they pardoned, the government pardoned all of the perpetrators so they could get better jobs in the government. Governments lied. The government lied about inventing the HIV virus as a means of genocide against people of color. Governments lied. The government lied about a connection between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, and a connection between 9/11/01 and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Governments lied. The government lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq being a threat to the United States peace. And guess what else? If they don't find them some weapons of mass destruction, they're going to do just like they Translation. The New Revised Translation says, repeat it after me so you won't forget it. God is not a human being that he should lie. Say it again. God is not a human being that he should lie. Let's say it together. God is not a human being that he should lie. Where governments lie, God does not lie. That's number one. Number two, governments change. Long before there was a red, white, and blue colonization, the Egyptian government was doing colonization. They colonized half the continent of Africa and colonized parts of the Mediterranean. All colonizers ain't white. Turn to your neighbor and say, oppressors come in all colors. Hello, hello, hello. But where the government of Egypt and Pharaoh ran it, they don't run a thing today. Why? Because governments change. When the Babylonians carried away the people of promise into exile, the Babylonian government was the baddest government around. But when King Nebuchadnezzar went crazy, his government was replaced by the government of King Belshazzar. King Belshazzar held a great big feast, big banquet, defiled the sacred vessels stolen from the temple in Jerusalem, and a hand appeared out of nowhere and started writing on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. And Daniel translated the writing for the king and told him, here's what it means, king. You can find this in Daniel 5. Write it down. Mene, God has numbered the days of your government and brought it to an end. Governments change. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales of justice and you're too light to balance the scales. Parsin, that's from the verb peres, your kingdom. Your government is divided and given now to the Medes and to the Persians. And the Bible says that night, that same night, King Belshazzar was killed and Darius the Mede took over the government. Governments change, y'all. Darius was replaced later on by another government. And then another 70 years later, King Cyrus said to the people of promise, y'all can go back home. All I'm trying to get you to see is that governments change. Prior to Abraham Lincoln, the government in this country said it was legal to hold Africans in slavery in perpetuity. Perpetuity is one of the University of Chicago words. That means forever. From now on. When Lincoln got in office, the government changed. Prior to the passing of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, the government defined Africans as slaves, as property, people with no rights to be respected by any whites anywhere. The Supreme Court of the government, same court, granddaddy court of the one that stole the 2000 election, Supreme Court said in its Dred Scott decision in the 1850s, no African anywhere in this country has any rights that any white person has to respect at any place, anytime. That was the government's official position, backed up by the Supreme Court, that's the judiciary, backed up by the executive branch, that's the president, backed up by the legislative branch, and enforced by the military of the government. But I stopped by to tell you tonight that governments change. Prior to Harry Truman's government, the military in this country was segregated. But governments changed. Prior to the civil rights and equal accommodations laws of the government in this country, there was back segregation by the country, legal discrimination by the government, prohibited blacks from voting by the government. You had to eat in separate places by the government. You had to sit in different places from white folk because the government said so. And you had to be buried in a separate cemetery. It was apartheid American style from the cradle to the grave, all because the government backed it up. But guess what? Governments changed. Under Bill Clinton, we got a messed up welfare to work bill, but under Clinton, blacks had an intelligent friend in the Oval Office. Oh, but governments changed. The election was stolen. We went from an intelligent friend to a dumb Dixiecrat, a rich Republican who has never held a job in his life, is against affirmative action, Against education, I guess he is. Against health care. Against benefits for his own military. And gives tax breaks to the wealthiest contributors to his campaign. Governments change sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. But I'm fitting to help you again. Turn back and say, he's fitting to help us again. Where governments change, write this down. Malachi 3:6. Malachi 3:6. Thus saith the Lord. Repeat it after me. For I am the Lord, and I change not. That's the King James Version. The New Revised says, for I, the Lord, do not change. In other words, where governments change, God does not change. God is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. That's what his name, I am, means, you know. He does not change. There is no shadow of turning in God. One songwriter puts it this way: as thou hast been, thou forever will be. Thou changest not. Thy compassions, they fail not. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. God does not change. God was against slavery on yesterday, and God, who does not change, is still against slavery today. God was a God of love yesterday, and God, who does not change, is still a God of love today. God was a God of justice on yesterday, and God, who does not change, is still a God of justice today. Turn to your neighbor and say, God does not change. Where governments lie, God does not lie. Where governments change, God does not change. And I'm through now. But let me leave you with one more thing. Governments fail. The government in this text, comprised of Caesar, Quirinius, Pontius Pilate, Pontius Pilate. The Roman government failed. The British government used to rule from east to west. The British government had a Union Jack. She colonized Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Hong Kong. Her navies ruled the 7 seas all the way down to the tip of Argentina in the Falklands. But the British government failed. The Russian government failed. The Japanese government failed. The German government failed. And the United States of America government, when it came to treating her citizens of Indian descent fairly, she failed. She put them on reservations. When it came to treating her citizens of Japanese descent fairly, she failed. She put them in internment prison camps. When it came to treating the citizens of African descent fairly, America failed. She put them in chains. The government put them on slave quarters, put them on auction blocks, put them in cotton fields, put them in inferior schools, put them in substandard housing, put them in scientific experiments, put them in the lowest paying jobs, put them outside the equal protection of the law, kept them out of their racist bastions of higher education, and locked them into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God Damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God Damn America for treating our citizens as less than human. God Damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme. The United States government has failed the vast majority of her citizens of African descent. Think about this. Think about this. For every one Oprah, a billionaire, you got 5 million blacks who are out of work. For every one Colin Powell, a millionaire, you got 10 million blacks who cannot read. For every one Skeezer Rice, you got 1 million in prison. For every one Tiger Woods who needs to get beat at the Masters with his cat blazing hips, playing on a course that could Of course, the United States government has failed the vast majority of her citizens of African descent. But I'm fitting to help you one last time. Tell me your neighbor, say, he's fitting to help us one last time. Turn back and say, forgive him for the goddamn. That's in the Bible, Lord.